I am 80 years old, and I have spent 7 decades living as a ghost in my own skin. For 70 years, the people of Sunflower County, Mississippi, have whispered my name with a mixture of pity and envy. They called me the luckiest girl in the Delta. They said that I was the one who escaped the red clay and the cotton rose. They told their children that I was a living miracle of benevolence, but they do not know that I was never a miracle. I was a transaction. I was a secret hidden behind white pillars and silk curtains. I am 80 years old, and today is the day I finally stop being a ghost. It is a humid Tuesday morning in the middle of July. The sun is a heavy, white weight hanging over the overgrown gardens of the Whitlock estate. I am standing at the rusted iron gates, my fingers curled around a key that has lived at the bottom of my purse for a lifetime. Behind me, a group of men in expensive suits are shouting. They are lawyers for the Whitlock family. They are waving papers and telling me that I am trespassing on private property. They are calling the local authorities, but their voices sound like the buzzing of flies. I do not care about their papers. I do not care about the police. I am looking at the house that ate my childhood. I am looking at the place where my father sold my breath to pay for his pride. But as the lawyers scream, my mind is pulled back to a different sound. It is a Sunday morning. It is September 14th, 1952. I am 5 years old. I am standing on the porch of our small sharecropper shack. The air is so hot, it feels like a wet blanket draped over my shoulders. My mother, Hattie Mae, is screaming. It is a sound that vibrates in my teeth. She is clutching the fabric of my dress so hard that I can hear the seams beginning to pop. On my other side, my father, Silas Jenkins, is pulling my arm. He is not looking at me. He is looking at the long, black Packard car sitting in the dust of our driveway. Standing next to that car is Mr. Harrison Whitlock. He is 72 years old. He is wearing a suit that looks like it cost more than our entire farm. He is holding a peppermint in one hand and a stack of $20 bills in the other. He is smiling a slow, predatory smile. He says that he is doing this out of love. He says that I am going to be a princess. The neighbors are watching from the road. They are nodding their heads. They think they are witnessing a blessing. They think a wealthy white man is saving a poor black girl from a life of labor. But here is the sharp, jagged truth that I have kept locked in my chest until this moment. My father, Silas, did not lose me in a game of cards. He did not lose me to the drought. He handed me over to Mr. Whitlock because he knew that if he did not, the secret of who really fathered his children would burn the county to the ground. I was not being saved. I was being traded to ensure that the bloodline of the Whitlocks remained pure in the eyes of the law, while I was tucked away as a living, breathing mistake. The history that Sunday began in the dust. In 1952, the Mississippi Delta was a place where hope went to die in the sun. We lived in a house that was held together by prayer and rusted nails. My father, Silas, was a man of few words and heavy hands. He had spent his whole life working land that he would never own. He owed the company store for the seeds. He owed the bank for the mule, and he owed Mr. Harrison Whitlock for the very dirt beneath our fingernails. The drought of that year had turned the cotton into dry, brown skeletons. The debt was a mountain, and Silas was a man who hated to be small. I remember the morning clearly. It was a Sunday, and we had just come back from the small wooden church down the road. My mother had made a pot of collard greens and a small bit of cornbread. It was the last meal we would ever eat as a family. I sat at the table and watched the flies circle the light. My mother, Hattie, was quiet. She kept touching my hair, her fingers trembling as she braided it into tight, neat rows. She knew, mothers always know when the air changes before a storm. She kept looking at the door. Every time the wind rattled the screen, she flinched. Silas sat at the head of the table. He did not eat. He just stared at the wall. He had a look in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was a look of profound, hollow defeat. He kept checking the pocket of his overalls. I did not know it then, but he was checking for a ledger. He was waiting for the man who owned him to come and collect his interest. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the sound of an engine broke the silence of the afternoon. It was not the sound of a tractor or a truck. It was the smooth, quiet purr of a luxury car. I ran to the window. I had never seen a car like that. It was black and shiny, reflecting the sun like a mirror. It looked like something from another world. My father stood up. He told me to go put on my yellow Sunday dress. I told him I already had my church clothes on. He gripped my shoulder, his fingers digging into the bone. He told me to go put on the yellow dress. Now, I went into the back room. I did not understand why he was angry. I put on the dress that my mother had spent all night bleaching and ironing. It smelled of lion sunshine. When I came back out, Mr. Harrison Whitlock was standing in our kitchen. He looked like a giant. He was tall and thin with skin that looked like crumpled tissue paper. He smelled of peppermint and expensive tobacco. It was a scent that I would come to associate with terror for the rest of my life. Mr. Whitlock did not look at the house. He did not look at my mother. He walked straight to me. He tilted my chin up with a finger that felt as cold as a stone. He looked at my eyes. He looked at the shape of my ears. He turned to my father and nodded. He said that I was exactly as Silas had described. He said that the debt was settled. He said that from this moment on, the Jenkins family did not owe a single penny to the Whitlock estate. My mother, Hattie, let out a sound like a wounded animal. She threw herself between me and Mr. Whitlock. She told him to take the mules. She told him to take the furniture. She told him he could take Silas to the chain gang if he had to. But she said he could not have her baby. Mr. Whitlock did not move. He did not even blink. He just looked over her head at the man standing in the corner. He asked Silas if he wanted the sheriff to come by. He mentioned the name of Sheriff Curtis Miller. Everyone in Sunflower County knew that name. Sheriff Miller was a man who did not believe in trials. He believed in the rope and the dark of the moon. If the sheriff came to settle a debt, people did not just lose their property, they lost their lives. My father looked at the floor. He looked at the stack of $20 bills that Mr. Whitlock had placed on the scarred wooden table. It was more money than a sharecropper would see in 10 lifetimes. It was enough to buy a new house. It was enough to move north. It was enough to forget. Silas reached out and took the money. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at me. He just tucked the bills into his pocket and turned his back. That was the first betrayal. That was the moment the protector became the predator. He told my mother to move out of the way. He told her that I was going to a place where I would never be hungry again. He told her that I was going to be a lady, but his voice was dead. It was the voice of a man who had already buried his conscience in the red clay. Mr. Whitlock took my hand. His grip was firm. He led me toward the door. I tried to pull back. I reached for my mother. She lunged for me, but the screen door slammed shut. I was led down the steps. The heat hit me like a physical blow. The dust from the driveway was kicking up in little swirls. I saw the sheriff's car parked at the end of the road. Sheriff Curtis Miller was leaning against the hood, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. He was watching us. He was there to make sure the transaction went through without any trouble. Mr. Whitlock opened the door to the pack. The interior was cool. It was the first time I had ever felt air conditioning. It felt like walking into a tomb. He ushering me into the back seat. I sat on the leather, my legs sticking to the material. I looked out the back window. My mother had managed to get out of the house. She was on the porch, her hair coming loose from her bun. She was screaming my name, Ruby May, Ruby May. She tried to run toward the car, but Sheriff Miller stepped in her way. He didn't hit her. He just put his hand on his holster and said something I couldn't hear. She collapsed onto the dirt, her yellow apron turning red from the dust. I looked at my father. He was standing behind her. He was not helping her up. He was not looking at the car. He was counting the money again. He was making sure that the price of his daughter was correct. As the car began to move, the dust rose up in a thick cloud, obscuring the shack and the weeping woman and the man with the money. Mr. Whitlock sat in the front seat next to his driver. He did not look back. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a peppermint. He unwrapped it with a slow, crinkling sound that seemed to fill the entire car. He popped it into his mouth and sighed. He told me that I should be grateful. He said that most girls like me spend their whole lives in the sun. He said that I was special. He said that he had a special room waiting for me at the manor. He called it the porcelain room. He turned around in his seat and looked at me. His eyes were milky with age, but there was a sharp, terrifying intelligence behind them. He told me that from this day forward, I was no longer Ruby Mae Jenkins. He said that the Jenkins family was a part of a past that did not exist anymore. He told me that I was a Whitlock ward now. He whispered that I was his last great project. He said that he was going to teach me how to be the perfect reflection of everything he had lost. I did not know what he meant. I only knew that the smell of peppermint was making me sick. I only knew that my mother's voice was fading into the distance. We drove past the cotton field. I saw the men and women working in the rows. They looked up as the black car passed. They didn't know that a 5-year-old girl was being stolen in broad daylight. They didn't know that the law was sitting on the hood of a car at the end of the driveway, making sure the theft was legal. We turned onto the long drive of the Whitlock estate. It was lined with oak trees that were hundreds of years old, their branches twisted together, blocking out the sun. It felt like we were entering a tunnel. At the end of the drive was the mansion. It was a white house with 6 massive pillars. It looked like a temple, but to me it looked like a mouth. The car stopped. The driver opened the door. Mr. Whitlock stepped out and reached for my hand. He led me up the stairs. A woman was waiting at the top. She was a white woman with hair pulled so tight, it made her eyes look startled. This was Mrs. Martha Gable. She was the housekeeper. She looked at me with a cold, disgusted expression. She asked Mr. Whitlock if it was clean. Mr. Whitlock just laughed. He told her to take me upstairs and burn my yellow dress. He said he wanted me scrubbed until I was pink. He said he wanted the smell of the sharecropper shack washed off me forever. Mrs. Gable took my arm. Her fingers were like iron. She led me through the grand foyer. I saw a massive staircase made of dark wood. I saw a chandelier that looked like a cluster of diamonds. Everything was so clean it hurt to look at. We went up the stairs, past doors that were all closed and locked. We went up a second flight of stairs, smaller and narrower. We reached the 3rd floor. The air up here was different. It was stale and smelled of lavender and old paper. Mrs. Gable led me to a door at the very end of the hall. She opened it and pushed me inside. The room was white. The walls were white. The bed was white. The floor was white marble. It was filled with shelves and shelves of porcelain dolls. They all had pale skin and blue eyes and frozen painted smiles. They were all staring at the center of the room. Mrs. Gable told me to stand still. She took a pair of scissors from her apron pocket. She did not say a word. She just began to cut my yellow dress off my body. She cut it into ribbons and threw them into a metal trash can. I stood there shivering in the middle of the white room. She took a sponge and a bucket of water that smelled of bleach. She scrubbed my skin until it burned. She scrubbed until I cried. But she did not stop. She told me that crying was for the weak. She told me that in this house, there were no children. There were only possessions. When she was finished, she dressed me in a white nightgown made of heavy silk. It felt cold against my raw skin. She led me to the bed and told me to sit. She walked to the door and turned back. She told me that Mr. Whitlock would be up soon to begin my lessons. She said that I was never to leave this room without permission. She said that if I ever tried to run, she would personally see to it that my mother was put in the state asylum. She closed the door. I heard the lock click. I was alone in a room full of dolls. I walked to the window. It was high up and it was barred with iron. I could see the sunset over the trees. It was the same sun that was setting over my mother's shack. I felt a sob rising in my throat, but I remembered what Mrs. Gable said. I swallowed it down. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the dolls. As the room grew dark,
I heard a sound. It was a soft, rhythmic scratching. It was coming from the wall behind the headboard of the bed. It sounded like something was trying to get in, or something was trying to get out. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper. I heard a voice. It was a whisper so low I could barely make it out. It was a girl's voice. She was saying a name. She was saying my name. Ruby, Ruby. I jumped back. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked at the door. I expected Mr. Whitlock to walk in, but the door stayed shut. The scratching continued. Then I heard the sound of a heavy bolt being drawn back. It wasn't the door to the hallway. It was a door I hadn't seen. A small hidden door behind one of the doll shelves swung open just a few inches. A hand reached out. It was a small hand, no bigger than mine. It was holding a piece of paper. The paper was folded into the shape of a bird. I stepped forward, my breath shallow. I took the paper bird. I unfolded it. There was a message written in a messy, childish hand. It said, "He is not your father. He is your jailer. Run before you become a doll too." Before I could say anything, the hidden door snapped shut. I heard the bolt slide back into place. I stood there in the dark, clutching the paper bird. I looked at the rows of porcelain dolls. In the moonlight, their painted eyes seemed to move. I realized then that I was not the first girl to be brought to this room. And I realized that the education Mr. Whitlock spoke of was not about books or music. It was about something much darker. Just then the hallway door opened. A sliver of light spilled across the white floor. Mr. Harrison Whitlock stepped into the room. He was carrying a small silver tray. On the tray was a glass of warm milk and a single peppermint. He smiled at me. He told me it was time for my first lesson. He sat on the edge of the bed and told me to drink. He said that once I finished the milk, he would tell me the story of why my father was so happy to let me go. He said he would tell me the secret that Silas Jenkins had been keeping since the day I was born.
I drank the milk because the silence of that white room was more terrifying than the man sitting on the edge of my bed. It was thick and tasted of something metallic, like a copper penny hidden at the bottom of a glass. Mr. Harrison Whitlock watched me with an intensity that made the skin on my neck prickle. He did not speak until the glass was empty. Then he reached out and took the glass from my trembling hand, placing it back on the silver tray. He leaned in close. I could see the tiny red veins in his eyes. He told me that my father, Silas, was a man of great ambition, but very little courage. He said that Silas had not just sold me to pay a debt. He said that Silas had sold me because he could not bear to look at me and see the truth of his own inadequacy. He whispered that my mother, Hattie, had once worked in this very house, long before I was born. He said that the night I was conceived, the moon was full over the cotton fields, and Silas was away in town. The air in the room felt like it was being sucked out through the keyhole. I did not understand everything he was implying, but the weight of his words felt like a physical blow. He was telling me that the man I called my father was a stranger to my blood. He was telling me that the protector who had handed me over for $20 bills had done so to get rid of a living reminder of his shame. This was the first lesson of the porcelain room. I was not a daughter, I was a consequence. Mr. Whitlock told me that from this day forward I was to be a blank slate. I was to forget the smell of the sharecropper shack. I was to forget the sound of the hymns in the wooden church. He told me that he would mold me into something beautiful, something worthy of the Whitlock name, even if the world could never know why. He popped another peppermint into his mouth and left the room, the lock clicking shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. The days that followed were a blur of white silk and cold water. My life was measured by the chime of the grandfather clock in the foyer downstairs. Every morning at 6 o'clock, Mrs. Martha Gable would enter the room with a basin of ice-cold water and a stiff brush. She would scrub my skin until it was raw and red, as if she were trying to wash the very color out of me. She never spoke to me as if I were a human being. She spoke to me as if I were a piece of furniture that required constant dusting. She taught me how to walk without making a sound on the marble floors. She taught me how to sit for hours without moving a single muscle in my face. She said that a lady of the Whitlock house was like the porcelain dolls on the shelves, perfect, silent, and unbreakable. This was the education Mr. Whitlock had promised. It was a slow, methodical erasure of everything I was. I was forced to spend hours in the library,
but I was not allowed to read the books. Instead, I had to listen to Mr. Whitlock read aloud. He read from leather-bound volumes about history and philosophy, his voice droning on like a swarm of bees. He would make me repeat phrases back to him until I sounded exactly like the white children in town. He wanted the Mississippi Delta out of my voice. He wanted the yes sir and the no sir replaced with the sharp, clipped tones of the aristocracy. If I made a mistake, if a bit of the Jenkins family slid into my speech, he would not hit me. He would simply take away my dinner and make me stand in the corner of the library for the rest of the night, staring at a portrait of his deceased wife. By the time I had been in the house for 6 months, I had learned the rhythm of the man. I knew that at 8 o'clock in the evening, Mr. Whitlock would retire to his study to drink brandy. I knew that Mrs. Gable would go to her room in the servant quarters at 9 o'clock, and I knew that at 10 o'clock the scratching in the wall would begin. I had not seen the hand again, and I had not received another paper bird, but every night I sat on the floor with my ear against the headboard, listening. It was my only connection to a world that was not made of porcelain and blue. One night, a Tuesday in early March of 1953, the scratching was different. It was louder, more urgent. I whispered into the wall. I asked who was there. I asked if they were a ghost. A voice whispered back, so faint I had to hold my breath to hear it. It said her name was Clara. She told me that she had lived in the porcelain room before me. She said that she was 15 now, and she lived in the attic, hidden away where the sun never reached. I asked her why she was hidden. She said it was because she had grown too old to be adult. She said that once the girl in the room reaches a certain age, Mr. Whitlock loses interest in the education and starts looking for a new reflection. She warned me that the porcelain room was just a waiting room for the attic. She said that there were 3 other girls up there with her, all of them graduates of the room. I was sitting in. My blood turned to ice. I looked at the dolls on the shelves. Their blue eyes seemed to widen in the moonlight. I realized that the room was not a sanctuary. It was a factory. Mr. Whitlock was collecting children, molding them, and then discarding them when they no longer fit the image he had in his head. I asked Clara how she got the paper to make the bird. She said she stole it from the library when she was being moved between rooms. She told me that there was a secret in the library, something hidden behind the portrait of the woman in the black dress. She said that the portrait held the key to our release. But before she could tell me more, I heard the heavy footsteps of Mrs. Gable in the hallway. I dove under the covers just as the door opened. Mrs. Gable did not turn on the light. She stood in the doorway for a long time, the shadow of her tall, thin frame stretching across the white floor. I pretended to be asleep, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought she must hear. She finally closed the door, but she did not lock it. That was the first time in 6 months the door had been left unlocked. I waited for 1 hour, listening to the chime of the clock. 11 o'clock, then 12 o'clock. My mind was racing. If I could get to the library, if I could find what Clara was talking about, maybe I could find a way to get word to my mother. I did not believe what Mr. Whitlock said about my father. I did not want to believe that I was a Whitlock by blood. I wanted to believe that my mother was looking for me. I crept out of bed. The floor was cold against my bare feet. I opened the door an inch at a time. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the pale moonlight coming through the window. I moved like a shadow, the way Mrs. Gable had taught me. I went down the narrow stairs and through the velvet curtains. The foyer felt massive and empty. I reached the library door and turned the knob. It was open. The room smelled of old paper and the lingering scent of Mr. Whitlock's tobacco. I walked to the fireplace, where the portrait of the woman in the black dress hung. She was beautiful, but her eyes were filled with a profound sadness. I reached up and touched the frame. It was heavy and made of gilded wood. I felt along the edges, my fingers searching for a latch or a spring. My heart was thumping in my ear. I thought about the 3 million views this story would get if people could see me now, a 5-year-old girl in a silk nightgown, trying to unlock a secret that had been buried for generations. I found a small indentation behind the bottom right corner of the frame. I pressed. With a soft click, the portrait swung forward like a door. Behind it was a small wall safe. It did not have a combination dial. It had a keyhole. My mind went back to the first day, to the key I had seen Mr. Whitlock pocket when he locked the 3rd floor door. He always kept his keys in a small wooden box on his desk. I turned toward the desk, But as I did, the lights in the library flickered on. I froze. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Harrison Whitlock. He was wearing his silk robe, and he was holding a glass of brandy. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed. He walked toward me, the ice clinking in his glass. He told me that I had moved faster than the others. He said that Clara must have been talking to me through the walls again. He called her a defective model. He reached out and closed the portrait, the click sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. He took my hand and led me to his desk. He sat down and pulled me onto his lap. I felt like a bird in the jaws of a cat. He told me that since I was so interested in the secrets of the house, he would show me one. He opened the wooden box and pulled out a long brass key. He said that this key did not open a door. It opened a ledger. He pulled a heavy leather-bound book from the bottom drawer of his desk. He opened it to a page in the middle. He pointed to a line written in elegant, flowing script. It was a list of names. My mother's name was there, Hattie Mae Jenkins. Next to it was a date, October 12, 1946, and next to the date was a number, $500. He told me that was the day Silas Jenkins had first approached him. He said that Silas had not been in debt back then. Silas had been in trouble. Silas had found out that Hattie was pregnant, and he knew that the baby was not his. He said that Silas had come to him, the man who owned the land, and asked for $500 to keep the secret and marry Hattie anyway. Mr. Whitlock laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. He said that he had given Silas the money because he wanted to see what kind of man would buy a wife with someone else's child in her belly. He said that every penny of debt that Silas had accumulated over the next 5 years was part of a trap Mr. Whitlock had set. He had squeezed Silas, year after year, crop after crop, until the debt was so high that Silas had no choice but to give the child back to its rightful owner. He looked at me and whispered that Silas had never loved me. Silas had only ever seen me as a $500 mistake that he was eventually forced to return. I wanted to scream that he was lying. I wanted to run back to the shack and find my mother, but Mr. Whitlock gripped my chin, forcing me to look at him. He told me that I should be grateful to be a Whitlock. He said that the red clay was for the common people, but the White House was for the chosen ones. He said that tomorrow, the education would become more rigorous. He said that since I liked to wander, I would spend the next month in the porcelain room, with the door locked 24 hours a day. He called for Mrs. Gable. She appeared in the doorway as if she had been waiting for the signal. She took me back to the 3rd floor. She did not use the back stairs this time. She took me up the grand staircase, as if to show me everything I was losing. She pushed me into the white room and locked the door. I lay on the bed and cried until my eyes were swollen shut. I did not listen for the scratching in the wall. I did not look at the dolls. I felt as if the porcelain was starting to grow over my own skin. I felt as if I were becoming one of the blue-eyed statues on the shelves. The next 4 weeks were a nightmare of isolation. My meals were brought to me on a tray. I was not allowed to look out the window. Every afternoon, Mr. Whitlock would come into the room and sit in a chair by the window. He would talk to me for hours about the purity of the bloodline. He told me stories of the Whitlock ancestors, men who had built the county with iron and blood. He said that I was the last of the line, even if I was a hidden branch. He said that he was training me to take over the estate one day, to be the silent master of the land. But then, on a Sunday in late April, something changed. The house was unusually quiet. I did not hear the chime of the clock. I did not hear the heavy footsteps of Mrs. Gable. I walked to the door and turned the knob. It was locked. As usual, I walked to the window and looked down through the iron bar. A dusty blue truck was parked at the end of the long driveway, just outside the oak trees. A woman was standing next to it. She was wearing a yellow dress. Even from the 3rd floor, I knew that yellow. I knew the way she held her shoulders. It was my mother, Hattie. She was arguing with someone. I saw the flash of a badge in the sun. It was Sheriff Curtis Miller. He was pushing her back toward the truck. My mother was shouting. I could not hear the words, but I could hear the desperation in her voice. She was holding up a piece of paper. She was waving it at the sheriff. I pressed my face against the bars and screamed her name. I screamed until my throat felt like it was bleeding. Mother, mother. But the windows in the Whitlock manor were thick and the wind was blowing the other way. She did not hear me. I watched as the sheriff forced her into the passenger side of the blue truck. I watched as the driver, a man I did not recognize, turned the truck around and drove away. The yellow of her dress disappeared into the green of the trees. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around expecting to see Mr. Whitlock. It was Clara. She was standing in the middle of the room. She had come through the hidden door behind the doll shelf. She looked like a ghost. Her skin was the color of parchment, and her eyes were sunken and dark. She told me that she had seen my mother at the gates before. She said that my mother came every Sunday. She said that Mr. Whitlock paid the sheriff $100 every week to make sure Hattie never got past the oak tree. She told me that the paper my mother was holding was a court order from a judge in the next county over. Clara took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but they were real. She told me that we did not have much time. She said that Mr. Whitlock was in town for a meeting with the bank, and Mrs. Gable had gone to the cellar to count the wine. She told me that she had found a way to the roof. She said that if we could get to the roof, we could climb down the trellis on the east side of the house. She said that we had to run now, or we would both end up like the dolls, frozen and forgotten. I looked at the rows of porcelain faces. I looked at the white bed and the white walls. I thought about the secret in the safe and the ledger in the desk. I thought about my mother in her yellow dress, fighting for me at the gate. I took a deep breath. I told Clara I was ready. We stepped through the hidden door behind the shelf. It led into a narrow, dark passage that smelled of damp wood and old secrets. We climbed a ladder made of rusted iron. We emerged onto the roof of the manor. The wind was cold and smelled of rain. Below us, the estate looked like a toy set. I could see the cotton fields stretching out to the horizon. I could see the red clay road where the blue truck had disappeared. Clara led me to the edge of the roof, where a thick wooden trellis, covered in ivy, climbed all the way to the third story. She told me to go first. I looked down. It was a long way to the ground. My heart was racing, but I thought about the peppermint breath and the metallic milk. I swung my legs over the edge and grabbed the wood. I began to climb down. The ivy was slippery, and the wood groaned under my weight. I was halfway down when I heard a scream from inside the house. It was Mrs. Gable. She had found the porcelain room. I looked up and saw her face at the window. She was looking right at me. She screamed for the driver. She screamed for the hounds. I moved faster, my hands bleeding from the rough wood. I reached the ground and waited for Clara. But as Clara swung her legs over the edge, the door to the roof burst open. Mr. Whitlock was there. He had returned early. He did not look like a refined gentleman anymore. He looked like a demon. He grabbed Clara by the hair and pulled her back. I watched as he dragged her away from the edge. He looked down at me, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He told me that I could run, but I could never hide. He said that the world was his, and there was nowhere I could go that his money could not reach. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran toward the oak tree. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until I reached the iron gates. They were locked. I began to climb them, my silk nightgown catching on the spikes. I reached the top and tumbled over, falling into the red clay on the other side. I was covered in dirt. I was bleeding. But for the first time in a year, I was outside the shadow of the white pillars. I looked up the road. The blue truck was gone. The sheriff's car was gone. The silence of the Mississippi afternoon settled over me. I began to walk. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to find the yellow dress. I had to find the woman who didn't care about the $500. I had walked for about a mile when I heard the sound of a car behind me. It was the smooth, quiet purr of the black pack. I dived into the tall grass by the side of the road. I pressed my face into the dirt and held my breath. The car slowed down as it passed. I saw Mr. Whitlock in the back seat. He was looking out the window, his eyes scanning the ditches. He looked like a hunter searching for a wounded bird. The car continued down the road, the dust rising up behind it. I stood up and looked in the opposite direction. I saw a small wooden building in the distance. It was the church. I started to run again. I reached the church and collapsed onto the steps. The door was unlocked. I went inside and hid under the back pew. I stayed there all night, shivering and praying. As the sun began to rise on Monday morning, the door opened. A man walked in. He was an African American man, with gray hair and a kind face. He was the preacher. He saw me huddled under the pew. He did not call the police. He did not ask for my name. He just took off his coat and wrapped it around my shoulders. He told me that he had been waiting for me. He said that my mother had been coming to the church every day for months, asking everyone to keep an eye out for a little girl in a white nightgown. He said that he had a car and he could take me to the city. He said that Hattie was staying with her sister in Chicago. I looked at him and asked about my father. I asked about Silas. The preacher's face darkened. He told me that Silas Jenkins was no longer in Sunflower County. He said that Silas had taken the $500 and the stack of $20 bills and moved to New Orleans. He said that Silas had told everyone that I had died of the fever. He said that Silas had buried an empty casket in the churchyard to make the lie real. I felt a coldness settle over my heart that has never left. The betrayal of the man who was supposed to protect me was complete. He had not just sold me. He had erased me. He had held a funeral for a daughter who was still breathing. I looked at the preacher and told him I was ready to go. I told him I never wanted to see the red clay of Mississippi again. As we drove away from the church, we passed the Whitlock estate one last time. I saw Mr. Whitlock standing on the porch. He was looking at the road. He looked small and old. I realized then that he had not won. He had the house and the money and the dolls, but he didn't have the secret anymore. I had the paper bird. I had the memory of the ledger, and I had the truth of who I was. We drove for 2 days. We reached the city of Chicago on a Wednesday afternoon. The streets were crowded and loud. It was a world of gray stone and iron, so different from the green and white of the South. The preacher pulled up in front of a small brick house. On the south side, a woman was sitting on the porch. She was wearing a faded yellow dress. I got out of the car. My mother looked up. She didn't scream this time. She didn't cry. She just stood up and opened her arms. I ran to her, and for the first time since that Sunday in 1952, I felt like I was back in my own skin. But as she held me, she whispered something in my ear. She said that we were safe for now, but we had to change our name. She said that the man in the White House would never stop looking. She said that as long as I was alive, I was a threat to his legacy. She told me that from this day forward, I was to be a secret once again. I looked back at the road, half expecting to see the black Packard turning the corner. I realized that my survival was not an end. It was a beginning. I had escaped the porcelain room, but I was still living in the shadow of the ledger. I spent the next 70 years building a life in the dark, waiting for the day I would be strong enough to return. And as I stand on the porch of the manor in the present day, holding the matches and the gasoline, I realize that the education Mr. Whitlock gave me was more effective than he ever intended. He taught me how to be cold. He taught me how to be silent. And he taught me how to burn everything to the ground to protect what belongs to me.
I am looking at the red plastic container in my hand, and I can feel the weight of every year I spent pretending I did not exist. The lawyers on the gravel driveway are still shouting. One of them is a young man with a face that looks like it was carved from the same cold marble as the foyer inside. He is telling me that I have 10 seconds to put down the match before he calls the state police. He says that the Whitlock Foundation will not be intimidated by a senile old woman. I look at him and I see his great-grandfather. I see the same set of the jaw. I see the same way he looks at me, as if I am a stain on the rug. I do not tell him that I have already called the authorities. I do not tell him that my grandson, Andre, is standing behind the oak trees with a camera and a satellite connection, broadcasting this moment to a world that no longer accepts the silence of 1952. The match in my hand is small, but it feels like a torch. I think about my mother, Hattie Mae, who died in a small apartment in Chicago without ever seeing the red clay of her home again. She spent 30 years looking over her shoulder every time a black car turned the corner. She spent her last days whispering my name, terrified that the man in the White House would come back to finish what he started. She never got her justice. She only got the fear. And I think about Clara. I think about the girl I left on the roof. For 70 years I have lived with the guilt of that escape. I have wondered if she was buried in the same churchyard as the empty casket Silas Jenkins bought to represent me. The young lawyer takes a step toward the porch. He says that the police are 5 minutes away. He says that I am going to end my life in a prison cell. I let out a laugh that sounds like dry leaves blowing across a grave. I tell him that I have been in a prison cell since I was 5 years old. I tell him that his family built this house on a foundation of stolen breath and blood that they refuse to acknowledge. I reach into the pocket of my coat and pull out the paper bird. It is yellowed and brittle now. The creases are worn thin, but the message is still clear. I hold it up so he can see it. I tell him that this is the first piece of evidence. I tell him that the porcelain room still has the scratch marks on the walls. Then I reach into my other pocket and pull out the brass key. It is the key to the ledger. I did not just run away that night in 1953. I went back into the library while Mr. Whitlock was chasing Clara on the roof. I took the brass key from the wooden box, and I took the ledger from the desk. I hid it under my nightgown. I carried it through the wood. I carried it all the way to Chicago. It has been sitting in a safe deposit box for 7 decades, waiting for the world to be ready for the truth. I tell the lawyer to look at the screen of his telephone. I tell him that the ledger is being read by thousands of people at this very second. I tell him that the names of the 5 girls who lived in the porcelain room before me are all there. I tell him that the payments to Silas Jenkins are all there, documented in the elegant flowing script of a man who thought he was untouchable. I tell him that the birth certificate with his great-grandfather's signature is being analyzed by experts in the city. The young man stops walking. His face turns the color of ash. He looks at his telephone, his fingers trembling as he scrolls through the images that Andre has posted online. The other men behind him go silent. The wind picks up, blowing the scent of gasoline toward them. I tell them that I did not come here to burn the house. I tell them that I came here to take it. I tell them that according to the law of the state of Mississippi, a direct descendant has a claim to an estate that was never legally settled. I tell them that I am not Ruby Mae Jenkins, the sharecropper's daughter. I am Ruby Mae Whitlock, the only surviving heir to the bloodline they tried to erase. I drop the matches back into the box. I do not need the fire. The truth is doing the burning for me. I watch as the lawyers begin to argue among themselves. I watch as they realize that the legacy of the Whitlock family is crumbling under the weight of a single ledger. I look past them toward the oak trees at the end of the drive. I see a blue truck pulling up. It is not the same truck from 1953, but it is the same color. A woman gets out of the driver's side. She is wearing a yellow dress. It is my granddaughter, named after my mother. She is walking toward me with a look of pride that makes my heart feel full. But as she approaches, I look back at the house. I look at the 3rd floor window, the one with the iron bars. For a split second I see a face. It is not a porcelain doll. It is a girl with dark eyes and a messy braid. She is smiling at me. I realize that Clara did not die that night on the roof. She lived in the shadows of this house, a ghost in the attic, waiting for me to come back and open the doors. I realized that the education I received was not just about being a lady or a possession. It was a lesson in patience. It was a lesson in how to survive, until the world changed enough to hear a voice that had been silenced in the red clay. I walk down the steps of the porch. My bones still ache, but the weight of the secret is gone. I pass the lawyers without looking at them. I walk toward my granddaughter. I look at the camera that Andre is holding. I look into the lens, and I speak to everyone who is watching. I tell them that the betrayal of a protector is a wound that never truly heals, but it is a wound that can be turned into a weapon. I tell them that my father, Silas, died in a gutter in New Orleans, clutching a stack of money that could not buy him a single night of peace. I tell them that the man in the White House died in his sleep, surrounded by dolls that could not love him. I tell them that I am the only one left. I am the survivor. I am the grandmother who went back for the truth. I tell the viewers to look at their own families. I tell them to ask about the suitcases under the beds, and the stories that are never told at the dinner table. I tell them that a secret is a debt that only grows over time, and eventually the interest must be paid in full. I tell them to subscribe to the truth, because the porcelain is breaking, and the real world is finally waking up. As we drive away from the estate, I do not look back. I do not need to. The house is still standing,
But it is no longer a temple, it is just a building made of wood and stone. The power of the Whitlock name has vanished into the Mississippi air. I reach out and take my granddaughter's hand. Her skin is warm and real. We drive past the cotton field. The sun is setting, casting long purple shadows over the land. I look at the red clay road and I smile. I am 80 years old. And for the first time in my life, I am not a ghost. I am a woman who is going home.